I see the red light now.
Okay. All right.
Well, let's see. We came to San Francisco when I was about in the 6th grade from Fresno, and from that time on, my grandmother lived up in Downeyville, and we went up there every summer. My mother and Dad would drive us up and leave us there with my grandma and my step-grandfather, and then go home and then come up and get us at the end. And my grandmother was a native of the mountains because she was born in North Bloomfield? No, yeah, North Bloomfield, someplace like that.
Yeah, North Bloomfield.
Yeah, and she was only about married about, let's see, 8 years or so, because when her husband died. He was a stagecoach driver between Nevada City and Downeyville and Allegheny and all those little mountain towns. And he died of pneumonia one winter, and she was left with 4 children and no income. So she knew the only thing she knew what to do was cook. So she got jobs as running boarding houses and that type of thing, and moved from like Nevada City up to Downeyville and different parts, and finally ended up in above Sierra City at the Sierra Buttes mine, where she was the cook for 40 men, and my mother and her younger sister would walk down the side of the buttes, the Sierra Buttes, to school in Sierra City. And my Uncle Lawrence, the older brother of my mother, and his twin, Gertrude, would not go to school anymore. They would help her. He would do the labor around, chop wood and whatever they had to do, and she would wait on table and help, that sort of thing. And Mother would set the table for all these men before she went to school, that sort of thing. And my grandmother was a very jolly sort of person, and she had a Chinese cook. And I remember her telling me one time when a rat dropped into the big pot of soup that she had on the stove. And my grandmother said, well, throw it out. And he says, no, no, no. And he didn't want to throw it out. But she insisted that he throw it out.
Because it was good protein.
A terrible person to throw out the soup, that type of thing. And she'd buy, 50 pounds of, maybe, I don't know, 25 pounds, 50 pounds of flour, and it would be, she remember one winter when she had the flour out in the shed where they kept it, and the rain and the snow rotted the wood under, and it fell into the water, and she was in bad straits for, she had just a lot of problems, but she survived all that. And then they moved to Downeyville. My mother went to school in Downeyville for a few years and that sort of thing. And when the children got to be older, in the late teens, my grandmother decided they should move to San Francisco where there's more opportunities for the children. So they did. They moved to San Francisco, and they lived on, I don't remember, somewhere way up in Market Street, I think. And I remember my mother talks about how they'd make she and her sisters would make hats. They had big hats with flowers all around it. And that sort of thing. But the worst thing that happened there was Gertrude, the oldest one, who was the oldest child, went out riding with friends of hers in a car in San Mateo, and the car was scared some horses, and the car went into a tree. Anyway, Gertrude either jumped out or fell out of the car, and she was killed. And my grandmother writes about this as in her diary, about how sad it was for her. Her pal was gone, and she used to go down to Holy Cross Cemetery and sit by the grave and cry.
Mm.
And it almost makes me cry when I think about it. Anyway, then my mother met my father through some of Larry's friends, and they were married in 1912. And then my brother Bill was born in 13, and I was born in 14. And my dad was a superintendent of laundries. That was his best role, and he would get jobs. He got a job up in Petaluma, and then finally we came back to San Francisco when I was about 6 years, the sixth grade, I would say, yeah. No, I mean first grade, 6 years old. And so that's where we lived. Until I was married.
Yeah.
And I went to sixth grade, first grade at, I can't remember the name of the school, down by Cap Street and Mission Grammar. And then I went to girls' high school in San Francisco. And then I wasn't thinking of going to college, but I had an English teacher, Miss Armour, who insisted that I go to college. So I went to college in 1932 over to UC Berkeley. The first year we had to go by ferry. We'd ferry across the bay and then take a train and then take a streetcar and get to college. But then after that, I think I talked about this.
Yeah, you did a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. How about talking a little bit about your early marriage life? You know, when.
Oh yeah,
where did you...
we were married in 1938. Was it? Yes, 1938.
Yeah.
And we were married at Mission Dolores Church. My family were very Catholic, and I had kind of drawn away from the church. When I met Don, he had a very religious family too, and we sort of were, I think, agreed together that it wasn't for us. But we were married in the church just to appease my family. And then we moved, well, Dad had been living with Stan Delaplane in San Francisco because they worked on the Chronicle. So we stayed there for a while until we found a place over in Berkeley, because we figured Berkeley was the only place in the world to live. And we found a little place in a court. I think the BART station is at that corner now, Grove and something, I forget where. And then our friends Mary and Dick Ritalik were married just about a month before we were. They lived in Berkeley. So the four of us started to learn to play bridge. We'd take the book, at the time it was Culbertson's book, and we'd hold it open and we'd bid and play. Then the war came along, and they had blackouts, actually, and I remember that we had a hall in our little apartment that had doors that closed off and there would be no light. We'd sit on the floor and play bridge in the hall.
Mm-hmm.
Then Judy was born in 2 years later, and she was a beautiful baby. I used to walk up to the campus and around there just to show her off. And then let's see, then we decided we had to buy a house. We had been putting away money to buy a house. So we bought a house in Belmont. Dad found it for $3,800 up in the hills of Belmont. But it hadn't cleared its title yet, so we were there for about 3 months when the war was such that we couldn't get gas for Dad to drive to the city, and we decided, well, we could give up this house because it wasn't, the title wasn't clear yet, so we gave up the house and got our $500 back and moved to the city. And we were in a flat on Guerrero Street, right off of 16th. And John was born while we were there. And then 2 years later, Bonnie was born. And now Judy and John would go out downstairs and on the sidewalk and that sort of thing, and they'd go around the corner and there was a bar there. Anyway, we decided, well, of course, no, wait a minute, I forget about the war. Dad was they finally got him he had to go to war. So he decided to learn to, one friend told him that if he joined the Merchant Marine, he wouldn't have to stay in for 4 years. So he did that. He joined the Merchant Marine, and he left and went to Okinawa. I mean, as far as Okinawa, on a boat, a big transport that transported soldiers over there and soldiers that were hurt coming back. And he was gone for 3 or 4 months. That was a hard time. And he came back, and I remember he brought half of the crew home with him. They were going to have a big party. So we had a big party. We opened the door, and even people that we didn't know came into the party. And so then we decided that we didn't want to live in the city anymore, because one of the things the first thing we bought, because we thought we had to have a piano. So we had Dad's brother Bob, who was quite a musician, find a piano for us. So we bought a baby grand piano. I think we paid $300 for it. That was a lot of money. And the next thing we needed was Encyclopedia Britannica, so we brought that. So those are the big things that we spent our money on. And then we decided that we had saved enough that we could have a down payment on a house. So Dad went down and found a house. So we came, and it was an old house down on Redwood City, down on Stambaugh Street. And it had 2 old people had sold it. It wasn't taken care of at all, but we put our money down on it, and we started to fix it up. And Jim was born down there, and after we were down the next year. So now we had our 4 children and a big house, and we lived there for about till Jim was in kindergarten, and we saved up enough to get a better house. So we moved up to King Street, And that's where we raised our kids, more or less, on Stambow and on King Street.
Yeah,
Now what?
that's great. No, that's fine. That's
That's kind of a, I don't know.
that was good. That was an overview of everything.